one is that the colloquium is going to be in English. We don't have a translation. Then the second announcement is that for security reasons, we will have an announcement from the people in charge of the auditorium. So let's hear the security announcement, and then we will start with the presentations.
Al escuchar la alerta sísmica, deberán permanecer sentados, manteniendo la cabeza baja y protegida con las manos. Solo por indicación del personal de protección civil, deberán evacuar el auditorio por las puertas de acceso sin correr, gritar o empujar, conservando la calma en todo momento y atendiendo la dirección de las señales de salida colocadas en los muros laterales. Una vez fuera del auditorio, deberán dirigirse al punto de reunión localizado en el estacionamiento. En caso de incendio, procederán a evacuar el auditorio sin correr, gritar o empujar, conservando la calma en todo momento y alejándose lo más posible del área, atendiendo las instrucciones del personal de protección civil. Por su atención, gracias.
Okay, thanks for your attention. Then we will start the first presentation. We have two really good speakers. They will talk us about economic growth, and as I can see, they will discuss two very important dimensions of economic growth. The first one is monetary policy, and the second one is capital education and human capital. These are going to be really interesting presentations, since they are talking an important issue, that is economic growth in Japan. And in Mexico, we can learn some lessons about how they have conducted the policies to get an economic growth, and that's important for us to have this exchange of ideas regarding these economic issues for both countries. And then, so I will give the word to the first presenter. His name is Akiro Omino. He is from Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. He will give the presentation called Studies on the Riots in Sanya during the Economic Growth of Japan in the 60s, Considering Socioeconomic History in Sanya and Kaiji Dasuki's Toth. Okay, so let's start the presentation. Thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. And thank you for kind introduction and this opportunity to present to you as the first speaker of the Colloquium. So I'd like to start my presentation. And actually I have changed the title of my presentation, but the theme is same. And today I will talk about Tokyo's day labor district, that is known as Sanya. And I will focus on the existence of local bosses in local society and the riots carried out mainly by day workers. And this is the outline of my presentation. First, I explain the viewpoints of this report, then I refer to the mode of day workers living in Sanya, before I mention about the riots and the local relationships. After that, I will indicate the existence of the local bosses as regard to the post-war economic boom. And this is the location of Sanya, and please check it briefly. And Sanya is located in the east part of Tokyo and not so far from the Ueno station. That is one of the main terminals of rail transportation. And this neighborhood is also next to Asakusa, where it's known as the famous sightseeing area. So if you visit Tokyo, you can stay in Sanya, because as I will as I will mention later, Sanya is a small quarter of low-cost lodgings. So the riots that occurred in post-war Sanya were carried out primarily by casual laborers employed in the construction industry. And Japan's construction industry played a central role in driving the nation's post-war economic miracle. And throughout the post-war era, it relied on a complex, multi-layered subcontracting structure. And Sanya's day laborers were recruited by brokers at the bottom of that structure. And as middlemen who arranged short-term employment, such brokers have great influence over the lives and livelihoods of day laborers. However, an analysis of the complex factors that shape the riot must not focus only on the relationship between laborers and labor brokers. And as this presentation demonstrates, it must also focus on relations between the owners of expensive lodging houses and the laborers as their guests. And an analysis of such relations reveals a correlation between the behavior of local lodging houses owners and the actions of Sanya's day laborers. And in the 1960s, affairs in Sanya were dominated by a small group of influential lodging house owners who served as unofficial local bosses. An examination of local relationships maintained by those individuals and how the relationships changed in the 1960s provide us with a glimpse of how rapid macroeconomic growth transformed the structure of local society. And Sanya is a particularly instructive case because the development of casual labor market and concentration of cheap lodgings was closely related with the broader expansion of the post-war Japanese economy and construction industry. And then, before discussing the role of Sanya's local bosses, I'd like to talk briefly about casual laborers that gathered there. And Sanya is both a casual labor market and the site of low-cost lodging houses, called doya in Japanese. And Japanese sociologist Eguchi Eiichi, who surveyed the living conditions on Sanya's day laborers in the 1960s, and he describes doya in the following manner. In doya, the only thing provided is space for sleeping, keeping oneself warm, and storing the small amount personal effects. And there are rarely facilities for cooking and eating. As such spaces are not provided, guests have to seek such functions outside of their lodging. And generally, they rely on the restaurants and merchant stalls that gathering in the vicinity of local lodging houses. And furthermore, visitors are strictly prohibited, so guests are required to meet friends and acquaintances outside the lodging houses. Commonly, they do not at the growing number. They do so as a growing number of local coffee shops equipped with televisions, or along heavily trafficked roadsides, or on benches in Sanya's few small parks. So this is a map of doyas and diners in Sanya district. And in Sanya, day laborers were able to pay for their lodgings each day. However, as explained by Eguchi, doya offer little more than a place to sleep, and day laborers had to seek food and other daily necessities outside their lodging house. In this way, laborers treated their whole districts of residents as their own living space. Conversely, however, they were alienated from possession of a personal living space. As a consequence, how lodging house owners treated their guests matters greatly to residents of Sanya. So under these conditions, the first in a series of labor riots occurred in Sanya. And the riots that occurred in the late 1950s and 1960s attracted significant attention from the media and the general public. Generally, they were characterized as a spasmodic outburst against the police rather than the consequence of deeper structural issues. Specifically, most observers attribute the riots to rough police treatment of drunks and interventions in quarrels between laborers. For example, the first labor riot on October 22nd, 1959 was sparked by a confrontation between police officers and a drunken laborer. The drunken worker approached the police box in Sanya and asked for a cup of water, and after the police refused his request, the worker protested and confronted the officers. This confrontation in turn resulted in his arrest. As the laborer was being placed under arrest, about 150 onlookers gathered around the police box and began to protest the officer's treatment of laborers, which the workers considered excessively brutal. And after this initial incident, 5 subsequent riots occurred in late 1959 and the spring and summer of 1960. The number of rioters increased with each protest and reached up to 3,000 by the riot on August 1st, 1960. And while many in the media and general public believed that the initial wave of labor riots was sparked by police mistreatment of laborers, but on the other hand, there were some contemporary observers who opposed such a spasmodic view. For example, Japanese social activist Kaji Daisuke wrote the following in an editorial submitted to the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. And he said, "Day workers in Sanya are more than a mere mob. They seek solidarity as a means of self-defense. They are united by a shared belief that neither religion nor politics can improve their lives." And his phrase, solidarity as a means for self-defense, suggests that the underlying causes of the riots in Sanya were more complex than a spasmodic view would suggest. And if self-defense was a major concern of laborers there in Sanya, the question is, from what were they trying to defend themselves? And in order to address this question, we must consider the role played by Sanya's local bosses. And according to an article from a magazine for police officers, the police increased the number of patrolmen in Sanya in response to a series of requests from good local residents. Although the article does not mention specific names, it is obvious that the author is not referring to Sanya's day laborers, because the article also notes that many guests of lodging houses possess a criminal record, but it is said without any ground. And it also mentions that a group of local residents organized a body known as the Association for Better Sanya in 1959. And against this background, periodic riots began to occur in Sanya. And the riots prompted an immediate response from the police. A large-scale, well-protected police box was installed in the area. The new police box was opened on July 1st in 1960 and was equipped with floodlights, loudspeakers, and wire nets that protected windows from rocks and other objects. And in addition, chairs and desks were donated by the Association for Better Sanya. And in July and August 1960, this new center of police authority was targeted by rioters. And entering the fall of 1960, rioting subsided and tensions eased for more than 2 years. However, laborers took to the streets again on November 23rd. After local police intervened in a dispute between an employee and a customer at the Asahi Shokudo, Asahi restaurant, and rioting followed after officers took only the customer to the police box. And during the riot in November 1962, crowds targeted both the local police post and Asahi Shokudo, destroying the latter in the process. And until 1962, a local consortium of lodging house owners, known as the Johoku Association of Lodging House Owners, managed this restaurant. But thereafter, the association chairman privatized the operation and assumed sole ownership. And under his direction, prices rose, but quality declined. And this prompted many customers to criticize the decision to privatize ownership of the operation. And the owner of the Asahi Shokudo was also part of a group of lodging houses operators who invested in a large-scale local lodging facility known as Palace House in 1962. And the plan for the facility was originally proposed by a group of 5 lodging house owners in 1956. And the initial plan included not only lodging facilities, but also an on-site medical clinic and leisure facilities, including a movie theater for the guests. However, the facility that actually opened in 1962 was quite different. It provided little more than lodging and none of the additional amenities initially planned. And to make matters worse for the worker, Palace House's lodging charges was higher than those charged by other local lodging houses. And that prompted an overall rise in price of charge in Sanya, as established lodging houses raised their fees to the level set by the new Palace House. So, the existence of local buses in Sanya is important to consider in this context. According to a survey on housing conditions in Sanya in 1963, there were 220 local lodging houses and 143 owners. And while 110 of the owners operated just a single lodging house, a group of 4 individuals operated much more lodging facilities. And the president of the Association for a Better Sanya, for example, he owned 70 local lodging houses, and the head of the Johoka Association of Lodging House Owners ran 10 lodgings. As I mentioned, he also owned and operated the Asahi Shokudo. The other 2 large-scale doya operators each owned 7 lodging houses properties. The original plan for Palace House was formulated and promoted mainly by these 4 local bosses, and it is my assertion that their behavior contributed to the dissatisfaction that ultimately prompted laborers to riot. And now, let us turn to a little broader examination of how macroeconomic trends impacted the situation in post-war Sanya. And the construction industry was heavily dependent on casual employment because of the widely varying scale and character of construction projects. And the growth of Sanya was accompanied by an increase in demand for construction labor. And supported by rising demand, the number of lodging houses in Sanya increased throughout the 1950s and 1960s. And official statistics from 1953 indicates there were 100 lodging houses and 6,000 nightly lodgers. By 1964, however, the number of lodging houses now eclipsed 200, and lodgers numbered 15,000. There is virtually no continuous research on lodging house ownership in post-war Sanya, but it is likely that the area's emergence as day labor market, combined with the post-war economic boom, served to strengthen rather than undermine the position of local bosses. And this is I think this is one of the background factors of conflict over the appropriation of urban spaces among different social groups, for example, day workers and lodging houses owners and so on. So I'd like to conclude my presentation by mentioning further research themes requiring additional inquiry. Research on the behavior of crowds tells us that they are conditioned by their surroundings, in particular the structural characteristics of local society. And although my presentation today did not go far enough in exploring this theme, it is my argument that the complex conditions that gave rise to a series of riots in post-war Sanya should not be reduced to a bifurcated conflict between laborers and labor brokers or laborers and small number of influential lodging houses owners. Therefore, today's report is still a starting point, and I'd like to research further. So that is all of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
So, thank you for such an interesting presentation. Now we will have Yasuhara Tsuyoshi. He received a PhD degree in Mexico at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He is now a full-time professor in the Faculty of Global Liberal Studies in Nansan University, Japan. He will talk about the interest rate and monetary policy in Japan and the lessons that we can get from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation, Alicia and Banya. And I will present about actual economic recession in Japan after the economic growth in Japan. I put the theme negative interest rate policy, but negative interest rate policy is highly strange. What's that, we think? But now, today, negative interest rate policy has been introduced in many industrialized economies. My presentation is composed as follows. We compare the policy scheme of quantitative easing policy and negative interest policy by Bank of Japan. And one of the important results is the rise of stock index. But the rising stock index suggests some contradictions with interest rate gap between United States and Japan. To investigate this point, we observe cross-border asset holdings, the compositions of Japan's international investment position. So, first, a quantitative easing policy of money supply has been introduced between 2013 to 2015 by Abenomics. A quantitative easing was the scheme that Bank of Japan purchases the government bonds of 80 trillion yen annually from private banks. 80 trillion is about 16% of GDP. And purchases this from private banks. And then, of course, Bank of Japan pay the money to banks. But Bank of Japan requires them to deposit the paid fund to reserve in the account, reserve account of central banks. And of course, pay interest to banks. And so it is clear that the result of is expansion of the amount of monetary base. However, a banking loans supply did not record desired increase. Of course, this is the policy only between Bank of Japan and banks. And so between banks and non-financial sector, there's nothing about in this policy. No? A quantitative easing policy brought high recovery of stock price Nikkei index, more than 60% from 2012 to 2013. The mechanism is as follows. The monopolistic purchases of government bonds by Bank of Japan restricted functions in secondary bond market. Hence, the investors transmitted the funds to stock market. And so in the stock market, there were so many operations, and the stock index rising up very drastically. However, of course, banks' loans to non-financial sector did not increase, or on the contrary, sometimes reduced. And the GDP growth rate was so unstable, rise and down in 2013 or 14. And after that, Bank of Japan recognized that this bond purchases policy make pressure on banks' opportunities to get utilities. And more confronted with the difficulties to continue this quantitative easing, Bank of Japan announced change of the policy rules. What is the change? First, to diminish the amount of bond purchases from 80 trillion yen to 30 trillion yen annually. And second, change the policy tools from monetary quantities to interest rate. In the theoretical framework, it's a great change. In this way, they introduced unconventional policy known as negative interest policy with the short-term policy rate. In Japan, it's called as call rate minus 0.1%. So here, no funciona. In 2016, the red line has down to bajo de cero. No? This was a policy, and it was planned that this policy will lead the long-term interest rate also will be declined to zero or minus level. The policy scheme of negative interest policy is as follows. Bank of Japan claims fees, or in reality it's penalty on banks for depositing additional reserves in the account. Bank of Japan changed totally the scheme from increasing monetary base to reducing the amount of purchases. And so it's on totally contrary. The desired goal of this policy change is to lead banks to increase loan supply to non-financial sector, because the new policy vanishes additional interest rate utility to banks by accumulating reserves in the reserve account of Bank of Japan. However, in reality, the fees or penalty on reserve deposits has been claimed only to additional reserve deposit or new reserve. And second, it was claimed only to local banks of smaller scales. Only small local banks, they claimed penalty. Why? I don't know why, but it's so strange. As a consequence, larger banks, well known as Tokyo Mitsubishi Bank or about that, there was no change to them. And so, the long-term credit rate also declined. It is suggested that the loan market was stagnated. And so, as a consequence, and the long-term credit rate, blue line and gray line, also was declined. So, to compare this policy, Japan's negative interest policy with negative interest policy in Europe and United States, we must look at this graph. The negative interest policy in Japan is to be distinguished from Europe and US with amount of government bond purchases by central banks. The European central banks and Federal Reserve increased the bond purchases amount only 1 year and only temporarily. After that, they decreased the amount. This green part is the Europe, and blue part is Federal Reserve. Only so temporarily, no? But Japan's case, the purchase of bonds by Bank of Japan is increasing to reach to 90% of GDP, and now about 5 years. And so, although Bank of Japan changed the policy scheme, but there's no change in the amount of bond purchases. It's quite different from Europe and United States case. And so our evaluation is that the negative interest policy in Japan may contribute sluggishly to economic recovery because the GDP growth rate is now stabilized, not high, but it's only stabilized. But the amount of banks' loan supply increased only slightly in 2017, about 5% of GDP. The policy provoked only high recovery of Nikkei index or stock index, around 50% recently. And so our observation on negative interest policy suggests some contradictions. Deposits of negative despite of negative interest, the cross-border capital flows do not yield distortions. The interest rate gap between US and Japan is widening today. And nevertheless, the exchange rate of dollars is relatively stabilized, the blue line. And the real economic activity is still in recession, and banking loans remains stagnated. However, only Nikkei index has been rising to reach historical level. Is why. To investigate these two contradictions, this was contradictions. And to investigate this point, I mentioned to United States case. In United States also, the federal rate was downsized in 0.1% until 2015. And in this period, the real interest rate also stayed in lower level, 1 or 1.5%. Nevertheless, the Dow Jones index, stock index, continues to rise up. Since that year, Federal Reserve changed to rise up the fund rate today. So hereafter, I mentioned the international investment position of Japan and the US. Rising Nikkei index reflects some influences of Dow Jones rising through interconnection or integration of stock operations in the time of financialization. On the other hand, Japan's banks have lost the opportunities to obtain utilities in domestic market. So banks invest their excess funds to alternative investment methods, maybe. This point is to be interpreted as cross-border asset holdings. Under negative interest rate, the asset holdings in portfolio or in other regions has been increased. Asia, North America, Europe, and other regions, this is. And in reality, Cayman Islands in Caribbean occupy larger, about or more than 80% of these other regions. In 2016, asset holdings in Cayman occupies more than 30% of portfolio in assets of Japan's international investment positions. And in Cayman, since 2012, huge amount of equities of hedge fund is published now, which are utilized to accumulate worldwide capital to invest in US. And so in US too, in the asset and liabilities of international investment position, the red line is Cayman Islands. Today, in both sides, Cayman is #1. In this graphics, the long-term treasury bills is not included because Japan and China purchase about all of them. And so China is only small. And Cayman is #1 today. And so today's cross-border capital flows are operated as asset holdings of equities and bonds with intermediation of offshore financial center Cayman Islands. Larger amount of cross-border assets holdings leads larger stock capital accumulation. Hence, additional stock operations yields rise up of stock index in Japan and US. And so lower interest rate policy or negative interest follows only this situation and stimulates such circumstances. And cross-border portfolio investment through Cayman Offshore Center is intermediated by a leverage operation. Downsides. The leverage is to obtain additional borrowings and external funds. Leverage means to obtain additional borrowings and external funds with overvaluation of capital value, and then invest the external funds to another investment. So larger banks in Japan have invested huge amount of funds in stock market of hedge funds, not in long supply. Rising stock index is supported by banks' funds based on cross-border capital flows through leverage operation. A real economy remains stagnated, and there is no sufficient liquidity creation. Hence, the global contradiction is identified between higher stock index and stagnated real economy and a negative interest rate. Such clear and present risk is labeled as Minsky moment in our economic framework. Japan's domestic economy stays in relatively stabilized growth, but the unconventional monetary policy in industrialized economies has provoked worldwide risk of stock index inflation supported by banking leverage operations in offshore financial operations in Cayman Islands. And so I say a negative interest rate is not bad, but today, in the worldwide level, the world economy is now in clear risk of a higher stock index. Maybe that is that. Yeah. So that's all. Thank you very much.
So next, we are going to have Alejandro Mendez. He has a PhD in sociology from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He's now working at the Economics Research Institute at UNAM, but he has some work on about Japan. Specifically, he has been working on corporate labor mobility issues, and he has some books regarding that Japanese economy. So we will have Alejandro Mendez now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Vania and Jose Luis for the invitation. I would like to talk about the one issue I think is important to the education systems in the world. So the mobility of the international students, I think, is the first link in the new system, the migration system of the talents, in this case, in Japan. This topic, the international students, it's an old topic in the world because maybe since the 19th century, many students, the different world, the different country, travel around the world to get better education. But now there are so different. So this is my interest about talk about you about the new way to the migrations about the international students. So first of all, I talk about the mobility of international students like a framework, like conceptual situations. Second, I talk about the international students in Japan. How many are there? How many are them? Where are they? So some data about the international students in Japan. And finally, I would like to talk about the Mexican students in Japan. So, first of all, the mobility of international students at the university level has been a constant phenomenon since the end of the 19th century. However, in the second half of the 20th century, the mobility of the students acquired an understanding pattern within the framework of the transnational worker training. This is the first, transnational worker training policies. That is strongly linked to the characteristic of the globalization, the transnational companies, etc. This led to this is the second framework, emerged of the educational governance. There's one system to what happened to education around the world. So this is the second framework, to create mechanisms for the organizing and integrating international education system, either through the bilateral agreement between countries. For example, Mexico and Japan, there are different agreements without these issues, or through the supranational organizations of the, for example, the OECD. Both the international agreement and the supranational organizations play an important role of the shaping the mobility scenarios of the university students. The mobility of the student became a link in the phenomenon of the international migrations when the students are not only training as a qualified human resource for their country of their origin, but are now also part of the human resource of the training country and the world. This phenomenon can be identified as education migrations, which privilege the immigration process based on the education credentials. For this angle, the analysis of the students as immigrations falls on the extension of the students as permanent residents. As students, they have rights, obligations, problems, expectations, or in the associated host. As migrants, they go through process of adaptation and integration in the host society. The transitions from the students to permanent residents is based on the being young with language skills in the receiving country, with education credential, with significant acculturation and job training. The international opening of the university is a sign of the globalization of the education. Traditionally, European and United States university were the main training center for the international students. Currently, Asian countries have become relevant in attracting students. Student mobility is an appropriate channel for the labor migration, since in the principal students have the idea of the place themselves with the international labor market. Universities so are the key in the following way of the qualification migrations. Migration and the education policies in Japan. The condition of the residents in Japan are varied. Only the category was the category where considering a qualified human resource are present. For example, occupations, professors, artists, medical service, research, instructor, engineer, entertainment, skilled worker, international technical training, and students. So I think these categories are called the talents or the person who has skills. And what happened in Japan about the international students? You can see in this graph that the number of the foreign students in higher education institution in Japan in 1983 is the bottom, and the 2010 is in the top. You can see how many students are in Japan. This you can see every year new students arrive Japan, and now there is a surprise. The line is always increase. What happened before the 1983? Before 1983, the international students were less, but now there's a high presence in the society in Japan. So this is a big difference for the international students for different countries, principal for the China, Korean, Vietnam, now for the Latin Americans. So, Japan education system is the first link in the migration of the qualified human resource. As shown in this diagram, the labels and categories in the Japanese education system are high secondary, technology college, junior college, university, master's, and doctorate course. For international students, you can see in the College of Technology in the year 3, they can participate, they can assist at this kind of course, the College of the Technology, and this is one reason about the increase of the international students. So this diagram of the education system, you can see move different categories. There are many students in the language, in the language schools, and the university, In this model, you can see why the new students, new international students arrived to Japan. The Japan Student Service Organizations, this is an institution in Japan, report every year one survey of the international students in Japan showed a significant increase in the number of the international students at the various levels of the students, the student. You can see in this graph, in 2050, there are 200,000 students. The 2,000 students and 152,000 there are in the high schools, and 17,000 there are in the higher Japanese language study. So in this graph, the different levels of the educations, the international students participate, and now there are the new situation is about the students in language schools. So the Japanese language is so important in the education for the international students. For example, the Chinese people study Japanese because they want to participate in the universities in Japan. So the universities in Japan, almost all the courses are in Japanese. So some schools now incorporate the English course, but all the students need to read and to learn in Japanese. So in the principal regions, the international students, for example, Kando is the prefecture, it's the best, the 100,000 maybe. In Kando, this is the prefecture of the Tokyo, and this is part they concentrate many students, international students. But in all the country, in all the universities in Japan, there are international students, different fields, different countries, but there are in each university there are international students. Principal the universities in Tokyo is Waseda University, is a private school, a private university. There are 4,000 students, and there are many in Tokyo. They are the University of Tokyo, University of Kyoto. So, every year, the organization report where are the students, the international students, and what happened with them. But now, what happened in Mexico? Mexico, the embassy of Japan give many scholarships about different programs. For example, they have to bachelor degree, to postgraduate, to teacher in service, professor, teacher in service, and they improve to the Japanese language, one program for the Nikkei community. So in this chart, you can see for the 10 years, maybe, they 200 scholarship. So it's an important number of the students who accept to study in English in different ways. So this is one channel to study in Japan. You can in this graph, los scholarships from the engineer is so important. So engineer is important to the University of Mexico, engineer to Japan, because there are different fields in the engineer to study: education, humanity, social science, and the health science. So this is the interest of Mexican to study in Japan. But other channel is from the CONACYT. What happened with the scholarship from the CONACYT for Mexicans? So first time is 2017, there are a few students. The blue bar represent to the Mexican who wants to study a postgraduate, like a master or doctorate, and the red bar represent to the Mexican study one for visit to Japan university for a short time, maybe 6 months, maybe 3 months. So I think the Mexican students are so interested to visit, to study in Japan. Finally, I think the international students need more attention for the studies, for the surveys, for the research, because there are some problems about the adaptation and integrations in Japan. And so there are new problems in Japan for the Hafu phenomenon. It's a mix of the new families about the Japanese and Mexican. So this is one topic also interesting. And the other is the academic networks. So many students maintain contact with for example, for the Mexican university, and create academic network so interesting. So I think, in conclusion, that international students for the Mexican and for other country is a topic, a great topic to understand what happened with immigration for the skilled worker. Thank you very much.
Human capital is really important to promote economic growth, and students' mobility it's a very important part of this human capital development in the world. So it was a really nice presentation. So let's take 2 or 3 questions, and then we will end up the presentations. Any question?
Hello, good morning still. Francisco Valencia, I'm the president of the Mexican Association of Foreign Scholars of Japan. It was really interesting, your details. I have a question for Omino Sensei and also for Alejandro Mendez. When I was in Japan, I was able to meet an architect that was also doing some research on the Sanya region. I was really interested in a little bit more of the sociological implications of this area, of this neighborhood, related to the discrimination or what they call in the Japan the 3K. You know what I mean, right? Mm-hmm. So I would like not to say the words, but if you can let me know if this is still a sociological discrimination happening, and what has been done in order to improve this. And for the professor, in the last year, we had an opportunity to talk directly with the Vice Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Japan in order to propose the increase of the opportunities for Mexican students to go abroad, rather than just be an exchange student in Japan, but to increase the opportunities of the MES scholarships for Mexican people. And in every year now we have around 25 or 30 among all the programs. And we still believe that for the significant economic situation between Japan and Mexico happening right now, the offer is still really low compared to other countries. I would like to know if you have also done this type of approach in order how we can also justify or have more stronger arguments to state to the Japanese government that we need to increase that percentage of Mexican scholarships. We also know that we have also opportunities through JASO or through the Mexican government, through CONACYT, but it's not something that is continuously happening, or even the JSPS for the Japanese Society for Promotion of Science, which is for the postdoctorate candidates, right? So we believe that this bilateral economic situation is happening right now. It's a very big excuse. But we would like also to team up in order to, like our association and other people that we are trying to increase these opportunities. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. And the discrimination against Sanya itself is diminishing in recent days, but I think it is no improvement. This is because the number of day laborers were declining in recent years. And in this rate, we need we need no labor market as certain space, because we can get day works through cell phone or advertisement in newspapers. So the science is getting smaller and smaller in these days. And so, as I said, discrimination against science is diminishing, but so this is because there's no day laborers anymore who are engaged with 3K works, but the situation is conversely getting worse, and Sanya is in recent years totally gentrified, and the neighbors in Sanya says in these days there are no homeless people. It is good for our district, and in that district, and there are emerging so many new buildings and shopping malls, and so I think the number of day laborers were declining, but conversely, at the same time, the discrimination against the Sanya itself was diminishing, but in other meanings, the discrimination of homeless or something was made stronger, I think.
Thank you for your questions. I think the Japanese has implemented a policy of the opening up to the foreign populations as a step towards the internationals. So I know different universities in Japan, they receive now, because now maybe 10 years ago, students for different countries. So this is a big sign to the open the university. Second, the Japanese company in Mexico, for example, the Bajío, the Mexico, the region Bajío, there are, do you know, many companies from Japan, and so a lot of the workers travel to Japan to receive training, especially training about the company. So this way, to the universities open and the worker in Mexico, Mexican worker work to the company, to the Japanese company. This is to wait to the I think can improve to the flow of the students to Mexico to Japan. And the other way is about the Nikkei community. Nikkei community Mexican maybe is different than the Brazilians Nikkei about the participate in Japan. For example, the Nikkei community from Brazil work in different company in Japan. They are in a special way to travel like a worker, but in Mexico, the Nikkei community, so there are different characteristics. So I think Nikkei community companies, Japanese companies, and the university now is open. Maybe this three part move more travels about the education, about the people who have to study in this place. In conclusion, I say I feel that now is more attractive for the students in this part of the world to travel to study in this part of the other world, like Korea, like Japan. So I think we, the international students, look for other opportunities in this country. I know that the United States and the other universities so attractive, but now in the competition world, Japanese is a new actor in this part. This is my opinion.
We have enough time to take more questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you thank you very much for all your presentations. It was really, really interesting. My question goes to Mr. Yasuhara. Thank you. Related on this quantitative easing policy, excuse me, my name is Mariana Espinosa. I am Director for Japan, Indonesia, and Malaysia in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Just relating to this quantitative easing policy in Japan, would you think this might be related also, I mean, just thoughts on this, to maybe the geopolitical aspects of Japan in Asia regarding maybe China or maybe other kind of more broadly economic schemes, I will say the CPTPP or maybe other kinds of commercial, I don't know, movements in Asia. So, and the second question maybe will be why this change in the quantitative easing and then to the negative interest rate in Japan, and why this is having, I mean, you explained already why this is not working, but it's my understanding also that Mr. Abe's intention to change again this policy in next year, maybe they're giving this no changes of this policy. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much for your presence. And so now I don't have PowerPoint, but yeah. The first object of quantitative easing or negative interest rate is to finance the government deficit. Because now President of Bank of Japan is and Shinzo Abe, they are so good friends. And Bank of Japan always supports or helps the Abe's administration. And so today, now there is no autonomy of central bank in Japan. It is integrated in the Abe's administration. And in 2015, Bank of Japan changed their policy from quantitative easing to negative interest. But because they thought that it will be impossible to continue purchasing so much government bonds each year until 2020. 2020 is the last year of Abe administration. And so they want to continue to support Abe's government to finance government deficits until the last year of Abe. Because under Abe, the government deficit is now increasing so much. The Japanese government has so much deficit, about more than 200% of GDP. You know? And so I don't know after that what will be happening. It's the same as Peña Nieto. Today it has increasing more and more the government's deficits, and Bank of Japan helps it. It's the main object of them.
Okay, so one more. Any more questions? Right there.
Thank you very much for good presentations. My name is Naotaka Hirami from Hiroshima University. I have a question for Professor Mendes. Right? I completely agree with you about the importance of student exchange and maybe the research exchange. And I'm trying to promote or encourage the Japanese or Hiroshima University students to come here, but not many people want to come. And because when I ask them, because it's dangerous. In Mexico, it's dangerous, it's too far. But too far, I don't think because, as was explained this morning by Ambassador, we have a 2 direct flight. And danger, peligroso, yes, some part, but not always. There is a dangerous part, even in Japan. But what would you recommend for us to recommend or encourage Japanese students to come here? Just in general, if you have something in mind.
Thank you. I know that Mexico is so dangerous. I recommend. In Mexico, there are big universities. The universities are organized in the maybe no dangerous space, like for example, the university, the UNAM has a place outside the Mexico City, in a place more quiet, more peaceful, but all the universities maybe don't live dangerous situations. I know that the country is some regions that are so difficult to live, but I recommend some place, some part of the country. For example, the Mexico City is still a good place to study. I know that the Japanese people know about the notice, about the news, about but old Mexico is no dangerous. But it's difficult to recommend. Now they have many problems, but I think the university is still a good place to live, close to the universities, a great course to take, but in some place only in some place.
Yes, I agree with you, because the tendency is that the journalist wants to tell something about or something different from other countries. But I think it's too much exaggerated, right? But my point is, Mexico is is a center or entrance to the Latin American countries, and you have a good network.
Yes.
In terms of Spanish, hablando Hispantes, right? So I'm recommending students to understand that the importance of the network, because this community will grow, I'm sure, and that's my observation.
I agree with your work, because Mexico is a part of the Latin American, but it's a big country, and this maybe the network to the other country, to the Latin American, is a good place to link to the other universities. And now by the Japans to America, from the Rio Mexico, ANA flights, is so direct flight. This is important too. I noticed this situation show that there are a good future.
In order to stick to our schedule, we will take 2 more questions. We have now this one and that one, and we finished.
Thank you very much. My name is Carlos Escobar. I work for CEPE, and I particularly work at CEPE Tasco in Guerrero. Yes. And I think I have something to say about your question. First of all, I would invite you to ask our students, our Japanese students here in school, how they feel, how they live. I'm pretty sure they will tell you that they are having a great time. This will sound like a big commercial, and of course it is. You're invited to go to Tasco, Guerrero, to enjoy a jewel of our colonial cities, historical city, small place where students can make friends and live very nicely. Unfortunately, as you said, and we all know, journalists always tell us about the bad things. But I think the best recommendation is by word of mouth. And you can ask people how they feel. They say it's dangerous, and I find that many girls are coming. I don't know if they are more brave than men, or because there's always a concern that a woman can be in more trouble, maybe not, because they are now very empowered. And Japanese girls show that. So if they have fun, I would recommend you ask them, because I've seen that only by word of mouth you can change this impression. So thank you for your concern.
The next one.
This is just a comment to add on the security matters of Mexico. It's very important to know as well, besides the media, what says media, also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan, Gai Musho, has a map of Mexico like divided in a traffic light colors. Like a red is a place that is not recommended to live, and yellow is to be careful, like places like Tijuana or Torreon, the state of Sinaloa, etc. But many of the other parts are still in green. Mm-hmm. So, but the fact that media, how do I say, exaggerates the information, I think it's the first information on hand for students like would like to take part of Mexico as an opportunity. And in our association, what we do is also, like for the students that come to CEPE every year, yes, we do the orientation for them in the beginning, and they do the orientation to the next generation every time in Tokyo. So this is probably a matter of dissemination of the information among the people that we know how to do the things in the exchanging students programs. Thank you.
Okay. So now we will deliver the certificates of participation to our presenters. The first one is for Suyoshi Yasuhara. Thank you. The next for Akiro Omino. The last one to Alejandro Mendez Rodriguez. So I want to thank to Alicia Giron for this magnificent and well-organized event. And we invite you to attend the next session, session number 2. Its name is Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement from Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's about trading, and this is a hot topic. We invite you to be here by 11:30. Thank you.